Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Well, greetings to you. Have you ever been traumatized? Most people have, believe it or not. Many people don't even realize they've been traumatized because they may think of trauma as newspaper headlines. In reality, most traumas are small t, not capital T traumas, and it can be consistent small t traumas that add up to something we call PTSD. You may have heard of that. Overcoming post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, I am very pleased to introduce my guest to you, Stephanie Lombard, who is the co-author with her husband, Shannon, of PTSD, How Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and PTSD Taught Me the Power of Pushing Toward Success Daily. Now, I'm going to repeat that, okay? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the Lombards have given it a new meaning, which is pushing toward success daily. Welcome, 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 Stephanie Lombard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duffy. Thank you for having me here this morning.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I have to tell you, as a clinician, I have a full clinical practice. I'm a social psychologist and a psychotherapist, that the notion of pushing someone who has been traumatized is antithetical to my therapeutic view. And of course, I had to read your book, and I must admit, I read it like as in a devil's advocate, like what on earth? This is a business book for people with PTSD, and what does that mean? Is that the old hoopla? The old, yeah, you can do it, you can get it, forget about how you feel. But you describe the difference between healthy pushing and unhealthy pushing. Mm-hmm. And of course, that turned me around. So I'm going to ask you to put it in your own words, and of course, with my little proviso there to explain it to us.
Absolutely. So, I had the great fortune and opportunity to walk through this journey with Shannon, my husband, who is the one who was diagnosed with PTSD. He was also diagnosed with depression and anxiety, which was kind of strange because he's always been the life of the party. So, in all honesty, for me, I've been a nurse for the last 16 years, and I didn't recognize those signs and symptoms, right? However, I knew something was different about him. And when he recognized that he needed help, there came a point in his journey where he knew he was going to have to do something different to feel differently, right? And so that differently meant little things gradually over time. And this has been, over the past 4 or 5 years that he's actively been, quote unquote, pushing, right? So those pushes were minimal. He describes those pushes as just getting up to go to the mailbox some days. Okay.
Yes.
And being able to go back and walk through this journey in writing the story, and also describing these tools that he utilized to push, really gave him and I an opportunity to really focus in on what were those little things. Because when you're doing it at a gradual pace, day to day, you forget even just the minute things that happened, like getting up and grooming yourself, like making sure that you're, engaging in conversation with family, just the smallest things. So those were some of those healthy little pushes. I will tell you what we saw before. His unhealthy pushes may have been to have a drink or 3 before a family gathering so that he felt comfortable enough to be around, not necessarily engage, but just to be a quiet participant in the room.
Yes.
So that was an unhealthy push. So recognizing that as a red flag or an unhealthy push in his life to get out of the door, we were able to then say, okay, what's something that is good, not going to harm him, not going to harm us as a family, and going to help us to move forward daily to get him to a place where he feels like he wants to engage again. And like I said, this took a number of years. I would say at least 2 years from separation of him taking himself out of the situation where he felt the most stress to actually feeling like, okay, things are better.
So out of just being able to identify those stressors, what are the most stressful events? And many people, and I'm hearing your language, I'm loving it. What is an unhealthy push? Well, I'm going to conquer this. If I feel stress in this situation, I'm going anyway. And yet identifying those stress triggers and staying away from the toxic stress.
I would say initially forcing himself to be in a place where he was uncomfortable. I'll give you a perfect example. He had a trigger recently, and I recognized the trigger early. And I tried to help him work through it and prevent a full-blown panic attack, as I saw it coming on. It was putting on a mask. So Shannon's a former firefighter. He has been in some pretty tough fires where he felt some sort of impending doom, for whatever the situations were that he was in. And he describes to me how wearing the mask with the oxygen, there's a point in time, and some firefighters may be able to relate to this, where it's like you're getting to the bottom of your tank and you're holding on to your last breaths from the tank. And whether that was reality or not, that was his reality. So when he puts on a mask or a face covering now, especially for this pandemic, it triggers him. And so he will become disengaged, right? So I see it coming on. We're going to it was an amusement park for like a food festival. It wasn't to go ride rides or anything like that with our 2 little ones. I see it coming on and I say, well, let's not engage. Let's just turn around. We can go home now. And he wanted to push and he kept, and it turned into an issue where security got involved. And because he kept wearing the mask improperly below his nose, in public, in a very open space, more than 6 feet away from other people. He was doing his best. That was the best he could do. And I said, we don't need to do this. We don't have to. We should leave. Eventually, I was able to convince him we should go because it was turning into an unpleasant event. That's an unhealthy push in my eyes. I didn't feel it was necessary. But I'll tell you the counterpart to that. Shannon recently successfully gained employment again. After 4 years of being a stay-at-home dad and taking care of our little ones, he's back in the workforce, and that requires him to wear a mask. So my initial thought is I'm having a panic attack thinking about him going to work.
Right. Yes. Right? Yes.
And how he approached it, he was very conscious about how he approached going back to work with this trigger, this specific trigger. He did things to help calm his mind. So he, on his own, bought some essential oils. He got himself some lavender essential oil.
Nice.
He kept that under his nose for about 10 minutes before he was going to be going to his new place of employment. He brought himself to a mindfulness place where he was able to focus in. He prayed for a little while. He gave himself some very positive affirmations. And then he went into work and he said, Stephanie, it was a good day. And I said, great. He said, trust me, I had a few moments where I started to feel like my panic level was beginning to rise, but I was able to stop. I was able to take some deep breaths, focus again, and then go back to it. And so he's been there for weeks now and successfully going to work every day and coming home after, anywhere from 10 to 12 hour shifts, which I call a huge success.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
So
I want to just catch everyone up in case someone just tuned in. This is Dr. Duffy Spencer. We are Just Relationships, WHPC 90.3. And I am interviewing Stephanie Lombard, who is the co-author of the book, PTSD, How Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and PTSD Taught Me the Power of, and here's the acronym, a new one, Pushing Toward Success Daily. So PTSD, again, stands for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And there is so much new literature now. There's so much research on the brain, on trauma and the brain, and how we can heal our brains so that we can have post-traumatic stress thriving. It doesn't have to be distress or disorder. And I was telling Stephanie that I was at first objecting to the concept of pushing someone who has anxiety and depression. And I just want to add in, Stephanie, in the recovery field, there's a general term, move your muscles, which is just so simple and brilliant, right? As you said, get up and go to the mailbox.
Right.
Move your muscles. Go outside. Just breathe in. You don't even have to walk outside. Open the door. Take a step outside. Do something. Do something. So now we're looking at what's the difference between a healthy push and an unhealthy push. And of course, an unhealthy push is what so many people do. We are called by social scientists a nation of addicts. And unfortunately, addiction is the norm. And we don't often even look at it as addiction. Fast food, junk food that so many Americans eat, the SAD, S-A-D, talk about another acronym, the Standard American Diet, in my view, is very, very sad. And Dr. Amen, A-M-E-N, does a whole series and many books on brain health. He says that mental health is really a problem with brain health. And how do you get your brain back to order? And the brain can be mishapped in not only official drugs, it can be from smelling toxins in the air, from paint or something like that, as well as sugar and the standard American diet. So what we're looking at when it comes to healthy pushes is what I would call tools rather than crutches, right? Which is the unhealthy pushes. So not alcohol per se or sugar, but you're talking about Shannon using mindfulness and prayer and affirmation and essential oils, as well as movement, grooming, and actually taking those steps to that job and following the rules, the norms of the job, which is mask wearing. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give an overview for people who may have just tuned in. And I'm going to just read some of the excerpts from your book. First of all, SOS Houston, we have a problem, right? The first is identifying that there is a problem, which is step number one in the 12-step movement, AA and the like. And moving out of your comfort zone and getting help, which is steps 2 and 3 in the 12-step movement. And I love this. Okay, take your steps, reframe your trauma, and rewrite your story. So how did Shannon rewrite his story? What was his story initially?
His story was one of, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking, Dr. Duffy. His story was, I'm an Air Force veteran, and I've been in the, field of firefighting in the Air Force, private duty, and then with the great city of Los Angeles. And he had seen so many different things, right? So the $1 million question has been, so what was that one thing that happened to you, Shannon, where you, snapped, realized there was something wrong, that sort of thing. And I think that's such a great question and a little naive. And it helps to show how much we don't know about PTSD. Yes. So he described to me how this was not something that just happened overnight. It wasn't something that was, one event triggered this.
Right.
What he noticed was over time, he could no longer, he describes it as a box in the back of his head. He could no longer keep the lid on the box in the back of his head. And now events that were, traumatizing, that didn't feel good, things that he saw out in the field, were no longer able to just stay back there. And he also didn't feel like he could just talk about it. So all these thoughts are swirling about in his head. He's having trouble sleeping, and there came a point where that lack of sleep, lack of communication built up to a boiling point. And he had the realization, he didn't say he ever felt like he was going to harm himself or harm anyone else, but he was constantly angry. I mean, Dr. Duffy, at the drop of a hat, the man that I always have known and loved as fun-loving, always the life of the party, you close the door, you get behind closed doors, and everything is a little fight. And then it starts spilling into, we're in public, we're around family, we're around friends, and the snapping is there, and these little arguments are there, and it becomes very uncomfortable for the people around you. So I think it finally accumulated enough where he realized there is a problem. He did need to either seek help, or the realization came, we were probably going to separate as a family as a result of this type of behavior. So I hope that answers part of the question.
No, that's. Thank you for sharing, and we can also look at in a little bit. And luckily, you're coming back for next week at what it's like to live with someone with PTSD and how you can start pushing yourself in a healthy way. So first, let me just comment on what you just said, Stephanie, which is I love that metaphor, Shannon's metaphor, the box in the back of the head and the could no longer keep the lid on it. Wow. We use that expression, keep the lid on it, but the idea of the box in the back of my head. And unfortunately, in a society which I categorize as feeling phobic, where we are afraid to express feelings because we're only allowed to have certain feelings.
Right.
And but the body doesn't know the difference. So the body just suppresses everything. Mm-hmm. And we walk around numb. And then we have, as you say, this spillage, this spilling over. And since we don't have any practice in expressing our feelings through words, what we say to children, use your words. Right. Adults also need to learn to use their words. And what Daniel Goleman would call, he wrote the landmark book, Emotional Intelligence, 1991. And I think it was 95. He coined the term in 91, the idea of emotional literacy, he called it. Most people are not emotionally literate. They do not put words on their feelings. They act them out.
Yes.
So in that setting where you're wrong to express and then you don't know how to express, so you express poorly, that people are told to just shut up and forget about it and move on. And so this repression, this suppression just happens, this box in the back of the head. So I'm just looking, and the idea of snapping, that he acknowledged it wasn't overnight. And if only we would have some sort of comfort when we are hurt or traumatized or injured. All we need is a forum and a listening ear and caring eyes and just to hold the space for someone to work it through, because the body knows how to process feelings if feelings are allowed. Mm-hmm. But again, we live in a world that disallows our feelings, so they remain stuck. And what we understand about trauma is that the brain goes into a freeze, that that the brain cannot process trauma.
Right.
So it's like a wad of chewing gum in the brain, and then it can go, as you witnessed, unfortunately, haywire.
Yeah.
So tell me more. Anything you want to share?
Yeah. So, one thing I find so important, and probably the two biggest things for me as Shannon's wife, somebody who loves him, who knows him like the back of my hand, is him being out of character, him acting out of character, saying things out of character, and that behavior escalating over time. Now that I look back, hindsight's 20/20, right? And now that I look back, those were red flags. Escalating, drinking. That was a huge red flag. It was one thing for us. We typically had a few cocktails, had a good time, socialized like that. Like, that was not an abnormal thing. But coming home from work, and he's off work and he's got a drink in his hand before I get there, that was abnormal.
Yes.
So, and him just seeming altered in character. Decreasing his engagement with his friends, not answering text messages or phone calls from people that were reaching out to him, buddies that we would, hang out with them and their spouses or significant others. He started to disconnect and disengage with the other relationships he had in his life. Same thing with family, close family members. So these were all little things. And I think it's so important to talk about it, because if there's somebody listening, Dr. Duffy, today that is recognizing those behaviors either within themselves or within the person that they love, it could be just a friend, it could be a family member. It's important to sort of address it. And I don't think that it has to be pushy, like you said, Dr. Duffy. I don't think people need to be pushed, but I do think people need to be engaged. And I do think the behavior does need to be addressed in a non-threatening kind of way. Just to be, to make sure that person knows that they're seen. Right. And to allow that space for them to be heard. Now, they can pick Shannon, and they might not be ready yet. And they might be pushed, they might push back. They might give you some pushback and say everything's fine. But those are the points at which you really should start checking in more frequently. That's what I think. The other thing is being open-minded to the process of destigmatizing mental health. I really think that it's so important.
Before we go on to that, Stephanie, because I couldn't agree more with destigmatizing mental illness. You said so much that's so important. I want to just address it. And I love that metaphor, red flag. And red flag is where you get stopped in your tracks. Yellow flags, right? What are the yellow flags? And I don't know if you know the story, if people know the story of the frog who falls into tepid water, and it's not a super big deal. And then, but that temperature incrementally increases, and the frog is lulled into being boiled to death. Versus, well, this may be getting worse. Let me get out of here first. Right. So many people just get lulled in, and when you use terms like disconnect and disengage, how many people would say, don't push me. I just don't feel like going out tonight. Right. No biggie. I just don't want to talk right now. I want to, I cherish my solitude. These are amorphous, kind of vague things. And at what point do you say, this yellow flag is starting to turn red? And you used a magic term. You used the term address in a non-threatening way. And many people go into polarities. They either don't address it, or they address it and what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? There's something wrong with you. You'd better stop it. Mm-hmm. So how would somebody address in a non-threatening way?
I think an example in our particular situation.
Yeah.
I could have definitely looked back and said, hey, honey, is there any reason why you haven't been wanting to go out lately? Is there
Right.
anything on your mind? What's been going on lately? Just those kinds of little questions that can turn into an open-ended conversation, and just wait for an answer, as opposed to trying to fill in the dead space, right? So when it gets quiet, it gets awkward. And when it gets awkward, somebody wants to fix it, typically, or just push it aside. So, allowing for that time and that space to open up some open-ended questions instead of yes and no type of questions, and see if there's an opportunity to dig a little deeper. And again, it doesn't have to be in a pushy, rude kind of way. It could really be, I'm curious, I'm interested in what you have to say and your thoughts, and giving that sort of empathetic voice, and tone to that conversation.
You're so wise, Stephanie. You said so many therapeutically correct things that you've done. You said you wish in hindsight you would have done a little bit more of that. And as they say, hindsight is 20/20, and our mistakes. You're here to tell people,
Yes.
right, what happened to you and your husband, Shannon, and how you got on the other side to the point of actually not only succeeding in life in terms of being out in the world and enjoying it, writing a book. You two,
Right.
you two wrote a book together. My goodness, how many people with PTSD wind up writing books about it? And I'm on the other side now, and I'm far from perfect, but I'm enough on the other side to look back and see what the problem was, what happened, what I did about it, and what you might think about doing. So the idea of being curious, when we look at the higher self, we look at how do you access the higher self, that part of that essence of us that is all knowing, and some people call it the soul, but wise, connected to all there is. And I always tell my patients, you have it. I don't feel it, Dr. Duffy. It's yours. You don't have to earn it. It's just a matter of accessing it. And Stephanie, that the first rung of accessing the higher self is curiosity. I just want you to know that.
I love that.
That is the first and easiest and best way to access the higher self. Be curious, not furious. Be curious, not furious. So, and you also talked about readiness. So this is tough. This is really, really tough. But somehow you got to him. I have to tell you, Stephanie, I am so glad that you are coming back next week, because it is so wonderful to talk about a real life situation you had with your husband, and I hear your love and devotion to him, and I would love to meet him someday. Please come back next week for part 2 of my interview on PTSD, how overcoming anxiety, depression, and PTSD taught me the power of pushing towards success daily, by Shannon and Stephanie Lombard. Stephanie, thank you so much. I will speak to you next week. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.